We've been talking about the Torah reading and about getting an Aliya. So a person gets called up to the Torah, and that we called an Aliya. We explained why we called it an Aliya yesterday. And when you get called up to the Torah, so this is something else we mentioned, was that really what it meant was that it was your turn to read from the Torah. But of course, the Torah has no punctuation, no vowels, no cantillation. You had to know what you're doing. And so already a very long time ago, people were less literate. People didn't know how to read. People didn't know how to read from the Torah. And so already in ancient times, they established a Torah reader, which would be a designated representative of the community who would prepare the parsha, who would prepare the reading, which meant knowing the words, knowing the vowels, knowing the cantillation. And he would be the one to read for everybody, the designated reader. But everybody still got their Aliya. So an Aliya means that it's your turn to come up and read from the Torah. Since we're not reading out loud because we don't want to embarrass people who might be called up and caught on the spot and don't know their Aliya, so therefore we have a designated reader. But the person getting the Aliya technically is the one who should be reading from the Torah, at least out loud. So what happens is when you get called to the Torah, you actually read quietly along with the reader, if possible. If you can't, that's fine. But ideally, when you get called to the Torah, you should be reading along quietly to yourself, if you can't read the words on your own. So you can just follow, just a beat behind the Torah reader and follow along and read inside, because it's really, you're being called to read inside in the Torah. Now let's take a step back. You get called to the Torah and you're reading from the Torah. Reading from the Torah is a mitzvah, right? Every time we study Torah, it's a mitzvah. So you have to make a blessing, just like any mitzvah. We make a blessing before reading from the Torah. Now the blessing on the Torah, it's a mitzvah blessing, it's a praise blessing for God, whatever. It's not so cut and dry exactly. But the point is that before we read from the Torah, we have to make a blessing. And the sages instituted a blessing before reading from the Torah and after reading from the Torah. So you come up to the Torah, and the first thing you need to know is, what am I reading? Right? You're going to make a blessing on the Torah and not know what you're going to read. It's kind of like, in a way, it's like, when we talked about hand washing, some of our other classes, and you cut the challah before you make the blessing, but you don't cut it all the way. You cut it a little bit because you want to make sure you make the blessing. You know what you're cutting and make sure there's no interruption. So to make a blessing on the Torah reading and then have to figure out where you're supposed to be reading is not okay. Ideally, you want to know beforehand where you're reading so you can open it up and read right away. So the reader shows the Ola, the one who gets the Aliyah, shows him the beginning of the reading, so he knows where he's reading. And Chabad custom is, it's not exclusively Chabad, but Chabad custom is to show also the end. So you show the Ola exactly his section. What is the section that he's being called upon to read, where it begins and where it ends? And of course, to show our respect and love for the Torah, you take the corner of your talis, or you take the belt of the Torah's belt that, somewhere on the bima. We want to take a holy item because we don't want to touch the Torah scroll with our hands. So we take the talis, a holy object, or the belt of the Torah, another holy object that's dedicated to the Torah, and we touch the beginning, we touch the end, and we give it a kiss. And that shows our love for the Torah. Then, obviously, people have various customs when it comes to reading from the Torah and making the blessings, but the Chabad custom is we roll the Torah closed to make the blessing. Why do we roll the Torah closed to make the blessing? The reason is because you don't want people to think that you're reading the blessing from the Torah scroll, because we know that the blessings are rabbinically formulated. They're not written in the Torah scroll. And so if you were to have a Torah scroll that had the Torah blessings written in it, that would be a non-kosher Torah scroll. And so we have to be careful, in Judaism, we're very careful not to embarrass people. We're very careful not to cast suspicion on people. And the same is true even about our Torahs. We don't want people to suspect that our Torah might not be kosher. We don't want to humiliate the Torah like that or cause a cloud of suspicion. So we close the Torah scroll. And in fact, you can turn your head even to the side. Now, if you don't know the blessings are to the right. You're going to turn your head automatically to read the blessings. But even if you know them, you turn your head to the side. So it doesn't even look like you're looking up, looking over even the closed Torah, because people from other points can't see if it's open, if it's closed, they can't really tell. So if you turn your head to the side, it's clear you're not reading now from the Torah. And you recite the blessing. Before the blessing, we say, Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach. We call out to the congregation, telling them, let's all bless God. And everybody responds, blessed is God. And then you proceed with the blessing. So you say Baruch Hu, which is a call to the congregation to respond with a blessing to God. And you, with the crowd, say Baruch Hashem HaMavorach. You recite that refrain together with everybody else. And then you recite the blessing on the Torah. Then the Torah is open. The Ola holds the right handle, the Torah reader to his left holds the left handle, and you read along. And as I said, the reader with the Ola should ideally follow along with the reader and try and read along inside. After the Aliya is done, you gather the corner of the talis again, or the Torah's belt, the sash, and you touch the end of the reading where you just concluded. You touch the beginning, you give it a kiss. Again, you roll the Torah closed and you recite the closing blessing on the Torah. So that's basically how the Aliya goes. After you finish getting your Aliya, so you stand to the right. You just move over. You don't go back to your seat. You stand to the right. Why do you stand to the right? Because we don't want you to miss another part of the reading. So, you just finished reading. You just closed the Torah. Now you've got to get your bearings about you and start going back to your place. By the time you start moving, you go to your place, you're going to miss the next person calling out Baruch Hu es Hashem, and you're not going to be able to catch up. So you stand on the side, waiting till after the next Aliya, and after the next Ola finishes his Aliya, there's a custom that you take again your talis, touch the outside of the Torah, you give it a kiss as you part, and you head down from the bima back to your place. Now, unlike when we headed to the Torah, when we wanted to show our excitement and enthusiasm to get to the Torah, as well as not burden the congregation by having to wait for you to make your way there, so you take the shortest route possible to the Torah. Here, when you leave the bima, you should not take the shortest route possible, because then it gives the impression that you can't wait to get back to your place and away from the bima, away from the Torah. And that's the wrong impression. We don't want to, that's not respectful. So we take a longer route back. So people circle the bima, whatever the case is, you take a longer route back to your seat, not the shortest route, the one that you had taken on your way there. And that basically is how an Aliya works.